The science of human development is an evolving science, and developmental scientists are now taking a new approach to the study of human development, and they're calling it the lifespan perspective. This perspective takes into consideration the fact that human development is multi-directional and contextual. It is multicultural, and it draws on many disciplines, and it is bound in what we call plasticity. So let's look at each one of those views in more detail. We start with the concept of multi-directional in development, and all we need to look at is how development follows different patterns, and that it is not ever a steady, static process. I want you to think of your own development and how that there are certain concepts in your development that remain the same from the day you were born. Let's say the shape of your nose, or the color of your eyes, or the color of your skin. However, there are areas in your development that went through what we call radical transformations, some improvements, and maybe you're at a time of your life that you're starting to see some decline in certain areas. So, take, for example, a newborn child. In the first 2 years, their development is going to go through what we call a radical transformation. By age 2, that infant has quadrupled their weight. They have reached half their adult size height. Now, if you were to apply this to the remainder of their lifespan, you will see that the first 2 years carry a lot of transformation in comparison to the rest of their life. Similarly, you will see that there are certain improvements in their skills as they develop. So, take, for example, a 2-year-old trying to button their jacket. This might be a process of about 20 to 30 minutes, whereas you could just throw on a shirt and button it as you are probably walking down the stairs or having breakfast. So, this ability to perform tasks has improved, and that is another aspect of how development is multidirectional. We are not doing things at a steady pace. We have some improvements, we might have some declines, and we might have some steady development, for example, in your knowledge base, your wisdom, your ability to talk becomes something that continuously improves as you continue to grow. So this concept helps us better understand why is it that, for example, when we are faced with the different stressors of life, pressure, stressful day at work, kind of brings us down. We bounce back, we continue, and then maybe another event bring us down. But then at one point in our life, we might experience a really traumatic experience that is unpredictable, that becomes a defining moment in our development, and it takes us a long time to bounce back and kind of get back on the high road. So those multiple aspects of our development, different patterns of our development, gives us a better understanding about human life. It also brings us to a very important concept, and that is the timing of development, and how that we go through periods that we might consider critical for certain areas of development versus other times that might not be as critical or can be just dubbed as sensitive. For example, we know that while a female is pregnant, there are periods in her pregnancy that the fetus is developing certain body parts. We know that it's a critical period for example, the development of extremities, the arms and the legs and the feet and the toes, during the period of between 28 and 54 days of conception. Why do we know this? We know this because um, back in between 1957 and 1961, there was a anti-nausea medication by the name of thalidomide that was given to women to help ease their morning sickness. And what they found out is that children of these mothers who consumed that drug were actually born with deformities. The newborn might be missing an arm or a leg or malformed body parts as far as the extremities. So this brought them back to examining what kind of um, medication or substance were they subjected to, and they concluded that that drug had interfered um, in that critical period of development of the extremities or the feet and the legs and the arms, and cause that deformity. So this is where we understand that there are certain periods of development that can be very critical, and if we do not allow development to happen, it cannot be remedied. It cannot be kind of fixed later on. So critical period is a time when a specific type of developmental growth must happen in order for normal development to occur. Otherwise, it just cannot be fixed afterwards. Another period is called sensitive period, and the difference between sensitive and critical is that the development during this period would make it much easier to happen if it took place during that period than if it was later on. But if it is missed, it is not as the critical period. It's not a now or never kind of thing. An example of this would be language. Language is usually a sensitive period of languages in the first 3 years. So if I want to really grow a bilingual child or a multilingual child, I want to expose them as much as possible to that language during the sensitive period of development, the first 3 years. Otherwise, it becomes harder and harder as they grow to gain that fluency in that second language. Another perspective in the lifespan approach is the concept of multi-contextual. Development has to be looked at from the concept of different contexts. What is surrounding that child that is growing? Bronfenbrenner is one of the perhaps the most known developmentalists that preached that concept of context. He came up with the ecological system approach, which basically stands on the belief that every person is situated within larger systems. It's kind of like nesting rings. It starts out with the child in the middle, and that child is surrounded by what he called the microsystem, and that is the immediate surroundings of that child. These people influence that child's development. So the family, the peers, the siblings, these are people who have direct interaction and direct influence on the child. That system is seated within yet another system that is called the exosystem. The exosystem is that external layer or external network that influences the microsystem. So it does not have a direct interaction with the child. It influences the microsystem that has a direct interaction with the child and therefore affects the child. A good example of this would be, let's say, the work of a parent. Let's say the parent works at a factory, And that factory needed the parent to have to stay late uh, 1 week. Those over hours of work had affected how much time that parent is spending with the child. Or let's say that the parent was fired from their job. That parent is going to be affecting the child. So that job, that work of the parent is considered part of the ecosystem, and that indirectly affected the child's ability to be with the parent or have resources because of the finances that might be cut. So this interaction is not direct with the job of the parent, but it was indirect through the effect of the ecosystem on the microsystem. The final layer, the outermost layer, is what we call the macro system. And the macro system is basically that larger social setting or the cultural kind of layer that houses all of those basic values and policies and laws and our nationality. A child, take into consideration, for example, children who were born to immigrants. That law might ultimately affects the child, because if the law protects that child's identity, nationality, then the child is able to have access to resources. If the law changes and says that no, you will not be treated as part of this society, and therefore you will be denied access to certain resources, then that in turns affects the development of the child. So every single system, as close as the micro, or the next one, the exo, or the last one, the macro, all of them collectively influence the child one way or the other, and therefore the development of that child. Next, we talk about another system that Brenner alluded to, and that is the mesosystem. The mesosystem, he said, is the interaction among microsystems. So let's look at the microsystems right here, and we said the microsystems are basically the parts that influence the child directly, like the family and the peer and the teachers that have direct interaction with the child. The interaction between them is what he called the mesosystem, meaning, let's say a parent-teacher conference occurred. Ultimately, it will affect the child because individually the parent is part of the child's microsystem and the teacher is part of the child's microsystem. But when the teacher and the mom or the parent sit together, talk about how can they devise an IEP that helps the child or a discipline plan that helps the child, then ultimately they are affecting the child's development. The final system that was added by Brenner was the Chronos system, and that he said that development should be looked at in the context of time. So we also have to look at that particular time in the lifespan of a human being, what was happening at the personal level? How old was the child? What was happening at the societal level? What was happening in the community, in the society, in the laws of the land? So this is why you can't take out the time factor when you look at how the child grew throughout the lifespan. Which brings us to the concept of a cohort. And a cohort is basically a group of people that are born within a few years from one another. And what a perfect time to introduce this, because look at what's happening in our nation right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. Think about the children that are experiencing COVID right now and had to shelter in place and be at home and went through what it means to be denied school and shift to virtual learning, or miss their graduation, or having their birthday at home, or all of those societal experiences are going to affect a group of people different than it would affect another group of people that did not live through the pandemic, did not experience what we're experiencing, for example, right now. And that's why we say that when we talk about development, we have to look into what was happening in the cultural, in the historical context. A cohort is born within the same historical period, move through life together, experiencing the same events, whether it was an increase in technologies like the generation that is born to know nothing without an internet. They just do not understand life without internet. How was it before? Or there was a cultural shift in the way they understood life. Changes about how we allow couples to live, the change in the context of homosexuality. All of those cultural shifts, technologies, pandemics, wars, are things that affect these people at as a group, and their development, therefore, is different than another group that did not experience that context. Next, we look at another context that Brenner said we have to take into consideration, and that is the socioeconomic status. And socioeconomic status refers to a person's position in society based on their income, occupation, education, and place of residence. So the first thing that comes to mind when we talk about socioeconomic status is money. But really, it's more than that, because the way you're viewed in society is not just based on how much money you make. It really is viewed based on who you are as an individual. Yes, how much you make, but also where do you live. Where do you live has an effect on what access do you have to certain resources. I want you to think about, even as we speak right now, how that certain areas in our society had better access to health, better access to schooling, better access to resources. It does affect who you are and your development, and how you can care for your child, or how your child develops based on where and what kind of neighborhood you live in. Education is also important, because based on education comes how are you going to treat that child? What kind of food are you going to feed that child? What kind of experiences are you going to expose that child to? And definitely your occupation, because with occupation comes status. Your occupation might not be generating a particular income, yet it has a particular level of respect in society that carries kind of a different weight than somebody that works at a different occupation. So collectively, this is what makes what we call our socioeconomic status, which in turn affects everything from housing to health to nutrition to habits to our collective knowledge. Another cultural perspective that we have to take into consideration is really the habits that we have that might actually kind of be the reason why we do things the way we do, and could either improve our development or hinder our development. So culture is a system of shared beliefs, norms, behaviors, and expectations that persist over time and prescribe social behavior and assumptions. So a cultural norm to one person might not be the same to another. And therefore, if I was a teacher and I did not understand somebody else's cultural background, and I assumed that, for example, a child who is not able to feed themselves at my preschool is deficient in their motor skills, it could very well be a simple mistake called difference equal deficit, meaning that I made the assumption that that child is incapable, has a developmental delay, when in fact maybe he belongs to a culture that values interdependence, or values the need or the pampering or the caring for the child until a certain age. I might come from a European American background that favors independence, so I want my child to learn to feed themselves. I want them to be able to dress themselves. I want them to speak and to say what's on their mind and share their feelings. But I might not be sharing the exact same cultural background as another family, and therefore their child might not have developed those skills that I value or I consider normal. And to them, the emphasis on things that are different might be more valuable to them than me. So it's very important to take culture into consideration when we're looking at development, so we don't fall trap to assumption of differences being deficit. Another context that we need to take into consideration is the ethnic background and racial background. And we see this a lot as we talk about the COVID-19 epidemic, and we see how that sometimes there are certain sections in our society that are suffering more than others because of the systematic racism in our society that has deprived certain groups of people of color, of opportunities or access to opportunities. And therefore, when we are hit with a tragedy like the one we're going through right now, we might be seeing a difference in the statistics because of that background. So when we talk about development, we have to take into consideration the whole baggage. We have to take into consideration, did the child have access to all the resources, to all the chances that another child might have, and therefore development was affected or not due to that inaccessibility to resources. The next concept is multidisciplinary, and that is really the heart of studying human development, because when we as we progress throughout the semester, we will be dividing each age category into three sections. The first section will look at the biosocial development of that child, or that stage of or that age. Biosocial development really includes that physical growth and the changes in the body and in the brain, and the nutrition and the health factors that affect that development. And then we look at development from a different perspective, and that is the cognitive development. Cognitive development refers to the mental processes and the memory and the ability to cognate and speak language and judge and inhibit certain impulses. And then the final perspective that we're going to look at is psychosocial development. And this is where we talk about emotions, where we talk about temperament and social skills and connecting with family and friends and community. So we're going to look at development in each of those domains as we progress throughout the semester. And therefore, it's very important to look at development from all three perspectives. A child might be, and I hear this a lot in my preschool, a parent might come and say, well, do I really need to keep him in preschool? He already knows all his alphabet. On the assumption that it's all about, academics, that all they need is to know their alphabets and their numbers, when that child cannot really sit still for 5 minutes, or cannot approach another child and play together, or share a toy, or wait their turn, or empathize. So their development is not one area only. Development encompasses many areas, and that's what the lifespan perspective preaches. The final aspect is plasticity, and plasticity really, it's defined as human traits can be molded as plastic, and yet they remain durable and predictable to a certain point, just like plastic. So this means just basically two things. One, change is possible. You can't really say that that's it, you're done. Unless it is a critical period that you missed, let's say a body part, a development of a body part, then you can say, well, you're not going to grow a toe when you grow up. But we are bound by our genetic makeup. However, we're not really stuck because of it. So if I inherited a particular gene, plasticity tells me that I can modify my environment in order to protect myself or to be able to function within that sensitivity or that liability that I've inherited. So this is the beauty of plasticity, is that change is possible, yet development builds on whatever came before.